Taittinger had invited other Kentish producers to show off their sparkling wines. There were wines from Chapeldown, England's largest producer, and Gusbourne, one of the country's most prestigious, as well as newer names like Squerries, rhymes with cherries, alongside veterans like Biddenden. The quality was high, with none of the searing acidity that sometimes characterised English wines in the past. Perhaps aware of the comparison, or as a bit of flattery, Taittinger did not offer its standard label, but instead brought out dozens of bottles of its £150 top-of-the-range Comte de Champagne. With everyone thoroughly refreshed, it was Taittinger's turn to speak again. He clearly, gloriously, had had no media training and rambled charmingly on subjects ranging from his recollection of English women encountered in his misspent youth. There's more than a touch of Evremont about Pierre Emmanuel, to how Kent held some advantages over Champagne, not least the lack of unexploded World War I munitions in the vineyards. With the rain, the sweaty marquee, the increasingly drunk guests and the risque speech, the event had more in common with a British country wedding than an event put on by a French wine company. Taittinger had somehow contrived to make the most English day out possible for the launch of Domaine Evremont. And yet, underneath all the fun, there was clearly a deadly commercial intent. Taittinger was investing millions in this. Finally, Taittinger ended his speech with the thought that perhaps Domaine Evremont would one day attract tourists from France to England. "There is a beautiful, unexplored island off the coast of France," he said. "French people coming to taste English wines. Now wouldn't that be something?" The money, the world-class wines, the slick PR, it's all a far cry from my first experience of English wine. That was at a wedding in the early 2000s at a country house in Suffolk that made its own wine. I can still remember the peculiar taste, initially quite sweet, then chalky, followed by masses and masses of acidity. This wasn't a German, mouth-watering acidity like you get in a Mosel Riesling. No, this was an acidity so hard it reminded me of the stone floors of my boarding school, and there was no fruit at all. It didn't taste like any wine I'd encountered before. After that, I had English wines occasionally, but even the best had a similar lack of fruit and hardness to them. The problem with England as a place to grow vines is not just that it's cold, but that it's also grey and wet. There's often not enough sunshine to ripen grapes properly, and the damp makes them prey to rot. Except in exceptional years, it takes a lot of care to ripen classic French or German grape varieties in this climate. So English growers planted varieties like Müller-Thurgau designed to ripen reliably early in cooler climates. But the growers were often ill-prepared amateurs. Vines were planted in places prone to poor sunlight, bad drainage, frost traps, and generally at the mercy of the elements. Winemakers overcompensated for the lack of ripeness by adding sweetness in the form of sugar or unfermented grape juice, thereby yielding pale imitations of humdrum German wines. And who needs England's answer to Blue Nun? English wines, with a few exceptions, were novelties, sold to holidaymakers in southern England. Or so I thought. In fact, there was a quiet revolution going on in the English countryside. It had been noticed by some pioneers that southern England's marginal climate was ideal for making sparkling wines, and boasted chalky soil just like that in Champagne. An American couple with no winemaking experience, Stuart and Sandy Moss, planted the classic Champagne grapes, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and Chardonnay, at Nyetimber in West Sussex. 1992, their first vintage, won a gold medal at the International Wine and Spirits competition. I tasted my first English sparkling wine in the late noughties. It was made by Ridgeview, one of the country's largest producers in East Sussex, and I liked it. Though the acidity was a little racy, it was clearly a very well-made wine. But it was another wine, also made by Ridgeview a few years later, that really changed my perceptions of English wine. It came from a tiny plot, which has now been pulled up near Reading, called Thiel Vineyard, owned by the Laithwaite family, the people behind Britain's largest mail-order wine merchant. It was appley and rich, and much more delicious than any champagne at the same price.